Expectancy. A caregiver's story of navigating family issues between retirement and transition. By Marvin D. Bryson. For my daughter Lakaya, who reminds me every day what life is truly about. Acknowledgements. I've been fortunate to have been mentored by many people along my life's journey, teaching me things both academic and worldly, in both professional and informal settings. Those worldly lessons from the streets informed a thought process that gave me a unique and different perspective on problem solving that undergirded my corporate successes, and moreover provided me with a resolve to adopt a personal doctrine of always trying something new when presented with the option. I first became aware of book publishing when my childhood friend Stephen Jackson undertook creating a scholarship guide in his early 20s. Later in life, I crossed paths with a kindred spirit scribe by the name of Drew Vincent Hunt that created a fictitious piece on an American expatriate's exploits during a summer romp through Europe. And lastly, my friend Joseph B. George's memoir on his experiences in the First Gulf War as a tanker in the Big Red One. While admiring their courage and demonstrated wherewithal to bring their thoughts to life, I never dreamed I would have something to say that would provide me with the impetus to actually make it happen in book form. So, to Steve, Drew, and Joe, my sincere thanks for showing me the way. My creative partners in this endeavor are Mr. Ken Watts of MECHKW Design and Mr. Thomas Scott Jr. of La Scene Media Group. Ken's expertise helped me realize a cover design that I can be proud of, and Thomas's editing of my words took what I hoped to impart to a level I could not have reached on my own. I appreciate you gents more than you know. Lastly, to my family, both Love and Bryson, and extended family, you are why I am who I am. One love. Preface. July 25th, 2016, was the day I sold our family home. I was 53 years old at the time, and had been my 90-year-old mom's primary caregiver for just over 4 years. Like many children with a parent that realizes an extended life expectancy, I didn't plan to be a caregiver, but kind of settled into the position by default. As I sat in a coffee shop waiting for the call to pick up my mom's settlement check, I felt that familiar twinge of shock, sadness, and melancholy that has overcome me many times in the past few years. The home sale was simply the latest of many steps, jolts, and necessary evils I've had to grapple with on my caregiving journey. Having experienced the death of my father 16 years earlier, and being tasked by him to settle his estate, I had come to appreciate what he was able to establish as a legacy for his wife and family. We both thought he was well prepared. However, I've come to realize just how woefully unknowing we were regarding issues that arise for individuals who live 10, 20, and 30 years or more into retirement. With this book, I hope to shed some light on this shadowy subject that many of us don't address, as it is unpleasant to think about, much less walk through. I'm not an attorney, insurance agent, or other individual attempting to sell you something, but rather an ordinary guy with an unremarkable education, sharing his experiences in hopes of making someone else's walk a little more informed in the event they have to deal with what I've been through. Chapter 1. My introduction to the world of estate administration. My introduction to the world of estate administration came in the mid-1990s at the ripe young age of 34. I remember it like it was yesterday because its genesis came in the form of a rare phone call from my father requesting my presence. Dad was old school. A child of the Great Depression, military veteran of Korea and Vietnam, and the literal personification of the strong silent type. So if he reached out, you knew it was serious business. Some of my clearest memories of him involve life lessons, particularly in regards to finance. As an elementary-aged boy, he would call me into his room, throw a pile of cash on the bed, and task me out to count it. While doing so, he often lamented on the value of real estate, more importantly being wise enough to maintain generational wealth or property handed down from parents to their children. His pet peeve was parents that were smart enough to attain property, but didn't train their children on how to keep it. Later, as a teen and young adult, I would come to understand his quasi-obsession through the many stories of how his mother's family had managed to acquire over 100 acres of land at the turn of the century. Over the course of 3 generations, family ownership had dwindled down to just 20 acres, 15 of which he ultimately carved out into 3 5-acre plots for himself and his sisters. His efforts in doing so literally took more than a decade of shifting through bureaucratic red tape and extended family communication issues. I learned so much from my dad. Not so much from what he said, but more so by observing who he was and what he did. I feel fortunate to have been raised by such an intelligent, hardworking, honest guy. As I write these pages, it's dawned on me that his work to maintain his family's legacy came about much in the way mine has. Out of necessity. So, back to the aforementioned phone call. When I arrived at my parents' house, my mom pointed me upstairs to my parents' bedroom. And much like his cash-counting lessons of my youth, my dad asked me to sit down at the foot of the bed and proceeded to lecture me on his estate plan. His instructions were verbal, simple, and clear enough to follow. Much to my surprise, my dad had decided to forego a will, and he then proceeded to explain to me why, in discussing the rules and laws of administering an intestate estate both on the federal IRS level and for the state in which he resided. For those of you who may not know, intestate is a legal term for a person who has died without having made a will. While this strategy was planned out and worked for my dad in his particular situation, I strongly advise one to seek out legal counsel when developing an estate plan. My dad's lecture came a few months after he retired, and a full 2 years before he passed away. Upon his death, I proceeded as instructed in settling his estate, and his legacy has provided for my mom and his children, grandchildren, and unmet great-grandchildren for nearly 17 years. In year 12, my mom's health took a drastic turn for the worse, beginning my journey into discovering just how much more is required in navigating family issues between retirement and one's final transition. Chapter 2. The Accidental Caregiver. Like many around the world, I was directly affected by the 2008 global financial crisis. A partner and I launched a business in 2004 on the West Coast. Our venture required raising large sums of money for media projects we were developing. We were adequately capitalized administratively, but couldn't sustain any production work, largely due to lending institutions tightening their belts by not lending to companies with thin track records. So in short, we couldn't fund any product to sell and eventually dissolved the business. Faced with the possibility of going back to work as an employee or continuing down the entrepreneurial path, I decided on neither. I had just enough savings to take 9 months off in order to recharge and plot my next course of action. The only question was where. Around this same time, My aging mom was starting to show telltale signs of mental decline to the point where she needed help with the day-to-day activities like cleaning, driving to the doctors, grocery shopping, etc. In addition, the old neighborhood was on the downturn, so my siblings and I decided, or rather I concurred with the decision to move her closer to my sister a few states away. It was a no-brainer given that A. With the relative real estate values, the move would result in a financial boon. And B. An improved quality of life for her, as she would be just around the corner from my sister, and eventually one of my two brothers who had also purchased a home nearby. While discussing where I could land with my sister, she casually mentioned that she could use some help with Mom. My brother also offered up his house as a place to stay until he and his wife were ready to relocate. So joining my mom and sisters seemed like the move to make. It had been nearly 7 years since I lived near my family. In the time I was away, my mom had knee replacement surgery and began to display early signs of dementia. On the occasions I returned home, I didn't really notice her decline simply because my visits literally lasted 2 or 3 days. Yet after my first few months back with her, I came to the realization that she needed much more assistance than I ever imagined. In the preface, I spoke of jolts and necessary evils. The first jolt I experienced was realizing that I had to take on the role of parenting my parent. With her increasing age and frailty, my mom's behavior became noticeably passive-aggressive, as she would even display juvenile histrionics whenever she needed help. I would also observe her struggling with budgets and bill paying and offered to take over managing her finances, an offer in which she enthusiastically accepted. The first necessary evil was cajoling her into recognizing that if she continued to drive, she presented a great danger to herself and others. Surprisingly enough, she gave up her keys rather easily. To facilitate our mother's daily life, my sister and I agreed to split certain duties. I took over grocery shopping, pharmacy runs, etc., while she handled doctor's visits, social activities like church, and other things women do together like going to the beauty shop or nail parlor. Becoming your parent's parent is an extremely difficult role to digest emotionally, but simple in retrospect when compared with what lie ahead. As we settled deeper into our routine, I took a menial swing shift job as my savings were running out. I also came to realize that the wages in a mid-sized southern town of 250,000 people are not close to on par with those in major cities, particularly with my skill set. So, my regroup plan was turning out not to be a plan at all. Eventually, my brother and his wife moved into their new house, and I found myself not leaving the area after a year, but moving into my mom's house with her as I was already doing her shopping, paying her bills, and maintaining the place. Just after I moved in, my mother began to have health episodes that required frequent emergency room visits. After one drawn-out ER visit, her dementia spiked noticeably, resulting in a pronounced memory loss. She would begin to repeat things not once, but over and over as her memory was deteriorating. Shortly thereafter, my oldest brother passed away suddenly of a heart attack, further exacerbating her mental condition as she struggled to deal with the loss of her firstborn. Given my experience with handling my dad's estate, my family looked to me to settle my brother's, which took another 1.5 years. So without warning, my 6-month to 1-year regroup sojourn had morphed into 2.5 years. Moving forward, things were more or less stable for the next year personally. Professionally was another story altogether, but I'll touch on that later. My mom had another health episode that required her being hospitalized for 8 days. At that moment, we all realized how woefully unprepared we were for the events that were unfolding. Since I had been the family member to deal with legal and estate issues, I slipped right into my role, not realizing there would be no turning back in my role as caregiver. Chapter 3. I've Got the Power. The purpose of this book is to empower readers to navigate family issues while caring for a loved one between retirement and transition. Essentially, my journey was one of reaction, not proaction. This chapter is about my first or reactive steps in getting our family's situation on track, and could be a practical first step for anyone. In any event, my first proactive step was obtaining a general durable power of attorney, as it's known in my mom's home state, or a durable power of attorney generally under the law. A power of attorney, also known as a POA, can be the most important of all legal documents. It allows one to open and close bank accounts, buy and sell cars, homes, or other real property, open, close, or make changes to utility accounts and more. A POA can empower one to act as an attorney in fact for the designee, my mother in our case. I use the word can because I am also my mother's federal fiduciary and trustee for a trust instrument, both of which do not recognize a power of attorney, as I was to later discover. But that fact is immaterial regarding the POA because it's the generally accepted legal document that allows one to act on matters the designee or principal can no longer handle him or herself. As discussed in Chapter 2, becoming your parent's parent is extremely difficult to digest emotionally and practically. For me, the biggest hurdle was actually acknowledging it. Once I took ownership of the situation, I was able to take steps towards remedying things. My big brother literally told me that I had to think of our mom as if she were my child in a sense, because in her condition, she wasn't really able to understand what was in her best interest anymore. At first I was taken aback by his statement, but then came to realize it was based on years of him being her caregiver at a time when she was still highly functioning. Prior to my mom's first hospitalization, she and I had agreed that I would take over managing her budget and finances. Because of our mother-son dynamic, trust was established. It was simply a matter of me acting as a combination of file clerk and bookkeeper on her behalf, reviewing her incoming correspondence, evaluating it to determine how it might affect her financially, and then managing her accounts payable and receivables. I would simply have her sign when and where required regarding property taxes, checks, and other legal documents. We got along well this way for a time. A new hospitalization and subsequent 30-day stay in a rehabilitation center changed everything for us from a personal and legal standpoint. Job-wise, the Family Medical Leave Act of 1993, FMLA, was a blessing to me. FMLA is a United States federal law requiring covered employers to provide employees job-protected and unpaid leave for qualified medical and family reasons. Reasons include personal or family illness, military leave, pregnancy, adoption, foster care, and other issues that may arise. The Act allows eligible employees to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave during any 12-month period to attend to the serious health condition of the employee or their parent, spouse, or child. Since we were basically in crisis management mode, I did a little research and created my own POA on the fly and filed for FMLA on my job. In my mom's home county, POAs are recorded at the Register of Deeds office and require a specific amount of witnessing and notarization before being recorded for a fee. I highly recommend one consult an attorney regarding any legal documents. My creation of our initial POA was sufficient temporarily, but not nearly as complete, accurate, and thorough as the subsequent POA our attorney drew up. Suffice it to say that we use the attorney's version of the POA now, not mine. Regarding FMLA, my mom's primary physician actually charged a fee to complete her paperwork. In addition, the company I was working for at the time required that I use any and all vacation leave I had up to 80 hours, and then any remaining FMLA leave requested would be allocated as unpaid leave for up to 12 weeks and within a fiscal year, or 1 year from approval, for example, February 24th, 2014 through February 24th, 2015. FMLA is highly complex and subject to interpretation by employers. One's employer's human resources department should have their policy on hand and assist you in navigating their process, while also providing the necessary forms for your particular situation. Once your FMLA is approved, I strongly recommend that you A. Completely understand your company's policies and rules for requesting time off under FMLA, and B. That you keep a record of requests for time off to your employer and a log of time actually taken off. Filing for FMLA at work to cover myself and obtaining a valid POA to legally execute my loved one's day-to-day transactions proved to be pragmatic first steps for me. Lastly, your FMLA paperwork must be renewed or refiled annually. Your situation may be different. So again, I strongly recommend one seek legal counsel when creating any aspect of an estate plan. In subsequent chapters, I'll discuss a list of documents you may want to consider and to provide a glossary of terms that I learned along the way to help you better communicate with attorneys, physicians, employers, and agencies that you may encounter along the way. Please note that the aforementioned glossary is exclusively available in the paperback edition of this book only. Chapter 4. A man without a plan is lost. As I sat to reflect on our family's situation, I had more questions than answers. I've always lived by the motto that an educated man may not know everything, but he knows where to find it. So my research began. As with any financial situation with which I find myself confronted, my first step was reaching out to my accountant. She is a CPA and enrolled agent with the Internal Revenue Service, so I felt confident that she stays abreast of the latest and greatest changes with the U.S. tax code and always offers sound tax advice. She suggested I come back to her regarding tax strategies once I had developed a comprehensive plan with an attorney who specialized in elder law. My accountant's advice had saved me countless hours and monies regarding my mom's present tax strategy, and I will be forever grateful to her. Taking her advice, I approached several law firms in our area and found that, like other legal specialties, elder law has its own niche. Whereas the more well-known legal specialties like personal injury and workers' compensation offer free initial consultations, the elder law firms I contacted each charged anywhere from $350 to $700 for an initial consultation. Most offered to include their consultation fee into services provided if I proceeded to move forward in estate planning with them. I've had the good fortune to work for some pretty savvy entrepreneurs in my professional life. They taught me to recognize that the most expensive service may not be the best option. And similarly that the least expensive service may not be the worst option. So, one has to discern who they feel will provide the best service notwithstanding pricing. Therefore, I settled on an elder law firm that I felt confident could deliver. My initial consultation went swimmingly. The attorney I chose was well prepared and asked all the questions I had anticipated as informed by my research. He also had a few questions I had not anticipated, but could answer as I had compiled a file that contained all my parents' vital information from healthcare to pension income to real property and banking. My father's status as a veteran offered even more options for my mom that I wasn't aware of, but informed of by our attorney. The following is a list of legal documents my family settled on as the components of our estate plan based on my mom's particular needs: last will and testament, durable power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, advance directive regarding a natural death, authorization for release of protected health information, asset protection trust, and lastly, a personal care or caregiver agreement. I realize that this is a rather comprehensive list. So keep in mind all of the items may not apply to your situation. Over the next few months, I worked with our attorney on my mom's estate plan. Many of the aforementioned items were taken care of right away, while others which fell under the purview of a federal, state, or local agency or a private entity would have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Upon completion of our estate plan, I organized what I like to call a signing meeting for my mother, brother, sister, and me to execute the documents drawn up by our attorney. I made every effort to educate my family beforehand, and moreover, I strongly advised them to write down any questions, comments, or concerns they had so they could be easily addressed by our attorney at the meeting. Thankfully, I have a family that is built on strong bonds of trust and cohesion. I think it comes from the fact that my parents were from strong, intact families, and that my father was a career military man having served just over 22 years in the Air Force. As you may know, families serve right along with their fighting man or woman and sacrifice greatly with long separations, and moving about the country and the world for that matter. I'm quite confident that my mom's grit and our military lifestyle are the discriminating factors in why our bond is so strong. Chapter 5. Family members as caregivers. Our mom's latest hospitalization was my first experience in having to deal with a substantial health crisis. Both our father and brother had died suddenly, so it was more a matter of sorting out the aftermath and not an ongoing circumstance. As most of us know, doctors treat symptoms in hopes that they can determine their cause. In my mom's case, this took a few days, and she ultimately ended up in the hospital for 8 days in total. The illness that had led to her hospitalization was responsible for yet another spike in her dementia and reduced level of cognitive function. So, upon her release from the hospital, my mom was immediately admitted to a rehabilitation center. Needless to say, my sister, brother, and I were truly taken aback at this point. Navigating a rehab situation is haphazard at best. At the outset, the usual immediate questions arose. How bad is it really? How long is the stay going to be? What is this going to cost? And so on. Unfortunately for us, there were no immediate answers. The first week of her rehab consisted of being evaluated, assigned a care team, and settling in. During this entire time, our care team, who were very professional and proactive, measured my mother's situation and then scheduled a meeting with us. We even had a meeting with a billing specialist who had sorted out her insurance coverages and explained them to us. Ultimately, she ended up spending a month in rehab, mostly to help her regain her strength and mobility, and also to assess the level of care that would be required upon her release. In the interim, I took the time to resolve my FMLA application at work and begin the search for the elder law firm I spoke about earlier. HIPAA restrictions are a nightmare for family members as it restricts access to medical records. So, if you are a person's child, you literally do not have access to your mom or dad's medical records under the law. HIPAA is the acronym for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act that was enacted by Congress in 1996. Protection and confidential handling of health information is a key piece of the act and requires healthcare providers and organizations, as well as their business associates, to follow certain procedures that ensure the confidentiality and security of protected health information when it is shared, handled, received, or transferred. This includes any family member, outside of one spouse, access to medical records. So, Obtaining an authorization for release of protected health information will become a high priority for anyone as a caregiver. About 2 weeks before my mom's scheduled release from the rehabilitation facility, we had a meeting with her care team. They stated that in order to determine the true level of care she would require, she would need someone to be around. Initially, I was miffed by this, but later would come to grasp that understanding the true meaning of her needing someone around could only be determined by observing her over the first few weeks at home while she received outpatient care. Her release terms included a certain number of visits from a nurse practitioner, physical therapist, and occupational therapist to administer care and assess her recovery. So, I literally needed to be around to manage and facilitate that entire process, along with taking care of her activities of daily living like cooking, cleaning, and medication management. FMLA was truly a godsend for those first 2 months, as it allowed me to be there for my mom and our family. At the end of the first month, it became clear that a caregiver would be required during my work hours, as my mom could no longer cook her own meals or manage her medications. Thus, my time out of the house was literally limited to work, shopping, and the occasional hour of personal time, since I didn't feel comfortable with my mom being alone for more than an hour or two. The hiring of a caregiver would put a strain on my mom's budget, but was doable in the short term. Fortunately, our attorneys brought to our awareness a Veterans Administration program for widows that we were able to take advantage of to help cover the additional caregiver expense. Moreover, my sister's schedule allowed her to take on the task. There are many tax and legal machinations involved when hiring a caregiver, not to mention the practical implications with managing schedules, discipline, payment, and so on. At the end of the day, our attorney had drawn up a formal caregiver agreement that stipulated caregiving would be done under the auspices of a contractor or 1099 arrangement, and in lieu of a W-2 or employee relationship. Employee situations involve the accounting of various state, federal, and other tax withholdings that we simply could not afford. I highly recommend that you consult both a tax professional and a legal professional prior to entering into any such engagement. Moreover, I suggest a thorough discussion of the arrangement with your family member that is considering taking on the task. Our situation revealed that communication and understanding could be issues, particularly regarding the tax implications regarding a contractor. Contractors are issued a 1099 for tax purposes, and not a W-2. Most importantly, a contractor must pay any and all taxes and other withholdings derived from that income. Suffice it to say that my sister and I working together to care for our mom was a labor of love. And although we entered into the process with the best of intentions, it truly became a challenge for the both of us schedule-wise, and me in particular because I shared my mom's home with her. Over the years, we reached out to community organizations, both public and private, for guidance, assistance, and counseling. I was pleasantly surprised by the plethora of options available. And although securing assistance isn't easy, it's very possible. Chapter 6. Outliving Your Savings. The subject of this chapter, outliving one's savings, is the biggest challenge a family faces when a loved one realizes an extended life expectancy. As discussed in Chapter 1, my father felt confident that the pension, savings, and investments he had accumulated would see he and my mom through their retirement years. In our family's case, so far so good, but the selling of our family home was more a necessity than a choice, as I'll discuss later. For now, I think it prudent that I go back to caregiving for a moment. Over the next couple of years, my sister and me settled into our caregiver routine. I would check on my mom in the early mornings before I left for work. Then my sister would come by from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. Monday through Friday to make sure that she got her breakfast and took her medications on time. Then I'd be around afternoons, nights, and weekends. My work hours were from 6 a.m. until 2:30 p.m. So it worked out to where Mom wasn't alone for more than an hour or two at most. While my sister and I shared responsibility for caregiving during the week, she had other obligations that made her unavailable most weekends, with the exception of a few hours after church on Sunday afternoons. So, I was on the hook literally 7 days a week. This situation was exacerbated when my brothers planned to relocate to the area never came to fruition. Just as he and his wife were getting settled, they received an offer they literally couldn't refuse, inducing them to make an unforeseen move to another state. So, he and his wife's chipping in lasted just a few short months. So while their support was much needed and greatly appreciated, their change of plans would leave the onus of the caregiving on me. And before I knew it, a year had passed where I took just a handful of time off from my daily caregiver responsibilities. Honestly, going to work felt like a break as it was less stressful emotionally. During that same time, I began the process of completing the paperwork for a veteran's widow pension our attorney advised me of. There were several major discoveries along the way, the first being that the Veterans Administration does not recognize a duly executed durable power of attorney, and if a third party would be administering the pension funds, they would be required to qualify as a federal fiduciary. Becoming a federal fiduciary is a tedious process akin to qualifying for a mortgage, while simultaneously obtaining a federal security clearance, complete with criminal background investigations, credit checks, and the whole 9 yards. It's so cumbersome, in fact, that there are companies out there that will act as your agent to complete the process for a fee. In addition, you're dealing with the government, so it takes months to complete, in my case, 7. Fortunately, the county we live in has a veteran service office where I was able to secure first-rate assistance. As most homeowners well know, household maintenance items and other small unexpected expenses can steadily nibble away at one's savings. Not to mention unforeseen auto expenses. My mom's luxury car had begun falling into a state of disrepair and was costing more to maintain than it was worth. Moreover, yearly inspections for a car she didn't drive anymore and unexpected household expenses were taking a serious toll on her bottom line. Our state requires annual vehicle inspections. And after a particularly high repair estimate to keep the car on the road, and for the third year in a row I might add, it became clear that the car needed to go. So after 13 years of our being stewards over our dad's estate, and since I was now managing all my mom's finances, I felt it necessary to sound the alarm with my brother and sister that we needed to look at ways to tighten up our mom's budget because she was headed in the direction of outliving her savings. Not to mention that after years of 7-day-a-week caregiving duty, coupled with a feeling of guilt that I was neglecting my adult daughter and grandchild, I was nearing my breaking point. So, it was clearly time that we started to explore other options. Chapter 7. Generational Wealth and Medicaid. Generational wealth, or the passing down of assets from one generation to the other, is an undiscussed topic for many families. I've read studies indicating that anywhere from 50 to 70% of a family's wealth is gone by the third generation. Unfortunately, this statistic strikes a very personal chord with me, as I've also witnessed one side of my family squander everything my grandparents built. From my perspective, it was essentially due to miscommunication, a lack of foresight by elders, and the natural discord that can occur in large families. Conversely, on the other side of the family there is a much smaller family unit. And the elders took measures to maintain as much of their hard-earned assets as possible, a tradition I am currently fighting to maintain. While researching in home care scenarios after my warning to my brother and sister that my mother was moving in the direction of outliving her savings, I discovered that the vast majority of programs required patients to be Medicaid eligible. I found this to be true for many assisted living and long-term care facilities as well. In my mom's state, the income requirement for Medicaid is just under $1,000 a month for an individual and $1,400 a month for a couple. There is also a resource cap of no more than $2,000. Resources are defined as cash, bank accounts, retirement accounts, stocks and bonds, life insurance, and other investments. For example, if your retirement income is more than $1,000 a month individually or $1,400 a month as a couple, and you have more than $2,000 in resources, you should examine the Medicaid spend-down requirements to determine Medicaid eligibility. Many people receive a monthly pension or other retirement income that is far too much for them to qualify for Medicaid. Children under 21 years of age, the disabled or blind, and other groups have Medicaid interests too, but my focus in this book is exclusively to retirees. So, retirees with excess income may qualify for Medicaid if they spend the excess income on medical bills. This is what characterizes the spend down in a nutshell. Medical expenses. As you can imagine, there is a plethora of rules and requirements for each state, so I'm just covering the essence of the Medicaid spend-down concept here. I highly recommend that you examine the rules for your state with a qualified state representative. In addition, many states have ombudsman programs that advocate for elderly patients and can help with navigating long-term care issues and concerns for your loved one. Unfortunately, many assume that the prepaying of funeral expenses, asset transfers to individuals, or asset transfers to trust instruments are part of the Medicaid spend-down. All of these financial moves are subject to the Medicaid look-back period for asset transfers and not part of any spend-down scenario. A 5-year period is required to make these transactions valid, meaning that asset transfers to individuals or asset transfers to trust instruments must take place at least 5 years prior in order to not be considered as an asset and therefore not subject to Medicaid's look-back provision. Although the prepaying funeral expenses will not help one meet Medicaid's eligibility requirements, it should be explored considering that funeral costs can range anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000. In my mom's state, the funds are placed into an annuity that is fully backed by the State Board of Funeral Services. I highly recommend that you look into the rules, regulations, and guarantees in your state before entering into any prepayment agreement. Regarding trusts instruments, they're extremely complicated, so I won't even attempt to explain them here. However, I do highly recommend you engage an elder law attorney to discuss your options. Although our family currently has created a trust, I am in no position to attest to how effective it is until we have to use it. As I write this, we are 37 months into the 60-month or 5-year look-back period for Medicaid. So, only time will tell, I guess, since the law is a living, breathing thing. Lastly, each state has its own rules, regulations, and definitions regarding Medicaid eligibility, spend-downs, and whether or not they choose to accept federal Medicaid funds. Moreover, these elements are changing all the time depending on state and national politics. So, Godspeed to everyone in navigating your state system. Fortunately, my family hasn't reached the stage where we have to apply for Medicaid to continue my mother's care. I hope and pray that day never comes. Chapter 8. Assisted Living. In the spring, we celebrated my mom's 88th birthday. It was a bittersweet occasion due to her gradual physical decline and continued memory loss. My comfort level with leaving her alone for a few hours at a time had long since dwindled. There were times when she would attempt to prepare herself some tea or something on the stove and inevitably forget she had left something on, resulting in the burning of a pot or pan and triggering smoke detectors. She would also get up in the middle of the night and turn on the porch light or open the front door in the expectation of a visit from my oldest brother, who was now deceased. Furthermore, she had reached a point where it was better to just agree with her when she thought she was at her parents' or uncle's house, lost the day, date, or time, or even when she didn't recognize us, as she often referred to me in my father's or her younger brother's name. Earlier on, we thought that our correcting her somehow brought her back to reality. But as she continued to decline, our efforts seemed to upset her more than help. Therefore, we just let her be, since it facilitated her relaxing emotionally and becoming peaceful mentally. Almost 2 years to the date from her last hospitalization, my sister found her on the floor when she came for a regular caregiving session. And while she hadn't broken anything or appeared to have any other serious injury, the event resulted in a hospital admission of 6 days. And like before, her transport from the hospital to the rehabilitation center required an ambulance due to her fragile condition. Having gone through a rehabilitation scenario just a few months earlier, my sister and I had an idea of what to expect. During our first consultation for this new visit, I got a sinking feeling that Mom's condition had deteriorated to the point to where she would require 24-hour care. Ever the optimist and not wanting to upset my sister any further, I kept my concerns to myself while the rehabilitation process played itself out. The estate planning we had put in place proved useful, as we were able to completely manage my mom's affairs no matter what the scenario. However, we still found ourselves unprepared for the blow received when it was confirmed our mom would indeed require 24-hour care upon her discharge. It's truly hard to explain the jolt I felt upon hearing this news. Moreover, we had just a matter of days to make the arrangements. So, in spite of my distress, I had to buckle down and move forward. Thankfully, I had a coworker who was faced with a similar dilemma. She and I served as each other's support system during the workday, sharing the latest mishap, struggle, or curveball that came our way as caregivers. I performed my financial due diligence and concluded that my mom's finances dictated that we place her in an assisted living facility in lieu of in-home care. My sister and I started by reviewing a list of local facilities. She had a friend whose mom was in a facility she liked. But since it was a 2-hour drive each way from where we lived, we both agreed it was off the table. Moving forward, we visited the facility where my coworker's mom stayed. While decent, there was something about the place that just didn't sit well with us. The second place we visited was completely unacceptable. Prayerfully, we were blessed to find a newly renovated and affordable facility on our third try. Racked with guilt and emotional confusion, we proceeded with enrolling my mom into an assisted living facility, knowing that it was the only way she could receive the level of care she needed. And although it was literally years in the making, our lives were completely and irrevocably changed within a matter of 72 hours. Chapter 9. Closing thoughts. The hours leading up to my mom being transferred from a rehabilitation center into the assisted living facility were a haze of activity, emotion, and resolution. Since she was a self-pay client and not on Medicaid, we had to supply her furniture and other essentials. Thankfully, we had the furniture that she needed on hand. We also acted on the advice of bringing along some family photos and an heirloom trinket or two to give her room a feel of familiarity. That suggestion paid off well, particularly a photo of the latest addition to our family, my mother's great-grandson Chase, as the final piece. Ironically enough, her first month in the assisted living facility went better than we had imagined. She hit it off with her roommate and had the same post-rehabilitation center routine in the form of visits from a nurse practitioner, physical therapist, and occupational therapist over the course of several weeks. The facility also retained a medical doctor that made weekly calls and served as some of the residents' primary physician. Over the coming months, I muddled through work, attempting to figure out what my new normal might be, and wrestling with the emotional shock, sadness, and melancholy that came with my situation. I've had to, and have to continually remind myself that she's getting the care she needs, and will be taken care of no matter what may happen with my brother, sister, or me. Despite our deepest desires, we simply cannot do what is required for her while having to take care of our own respective families. What the future holds, as well as one's life expectancy, remains an unknown proposition despite one's best laid plans. My mom's mother lived to be 102 years old, so with my mom just turning 90, she actually seems young by comparison. In adjusting our plan for my mom's future needs yet again, it also dawned on me that it had been a full 19 years since my dad retired, and 16 since he passed. So in earnest, I had to take a moment and reflect on the fact that we had managed to do a decent job in keeping my mom comfortable for nearly 15 years. However, given my grandmother's lifespan, we are faced with the proposition of managing my mother's estate in a manner that best serves her for what could be another 15 years, or a 35-year retirement. Needless to say, it's a daunting task, which brings me back to our family home. In Chapter 7, I discussed Medicaid, generational wealth, trusts, etc. One of the many caveats in the trust instrument we employed is that the property can be lived in by family, but not rented out in the traditional sense. Therefore, we were faced with attempting to find the resources to keep up a property that was unoccupied, so ultimately, we opted to convert the property within the trust. Looking to the future, one would think that property, cash, and a decent pension might be enough to ensure a comfortable retirement. However, considering that the cost of in-home care, assisted living, and long-term care facilities range anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 a month, one could easily go through their savings, property, and investments in just a few years. Therein lies the dilemma, and why I took the time to share my story of navigating my mother's care between her retirement and final transition. Expectancy was published in 2016 when my mom was residing in an assisted living facility. She was with us until 2019 and declined through a process that required skilled nursing, palliative care, and hospice before she passed. It is my hope to continue to honor my mother's memory by closing the circle and publish those experiences as well. Thank you for taking time to listen to this free version of Expectancy, a caregiver's story of navigating family issues between retirement and transition. There is also a paperback version available for purchase at Amazon.com. This more comprehensive version of the text contains a glossary of legal and medical terminology to assist you in developing a comprehensive plan for you and your loved ones. And as always, don't forget to share the book and start the conversation.